When you picture modern Croatia, you're probably thinking about those sunny, tourist-filled beaches and crystal-clear waters, right? But behind that incredible vacation spot lies a pretty bloody 2,000-year history. This is a land that has literally been fought over by overlapping empires for millennia. It was torn apart by modern wars, and yet, somehow, it's emerged as one of Europe's most remarkable independent success stories. So how exactly did that happen? Well, let's dive into this explainer and find out.
Welcome back. Today we're tracking the incredible evolution of Croatia. We're going on a clear, structured journey, right from its prehistoric roots and ancient conquerors, all the way to its hard-fought path toward European integration. As you'll see, we're exploring exactly how this nation was forged in the crucible of conflict to achieve an ultimate triumph.
To make sense of all this incredibly dense history, we're going to use this roadmap to break it down into 5 digestible chapters. First, we'll look at the crossroads of empires. Then, the turbulent 20th century, followed by the War of Independence. After that, joining the European Union, and we'll finally wrap up with tourism and cultural heritage.
Starting off with Section 1, Crossroads of Empires, a borderland shaped by conquerors. You see, because of its incredibly rugged geography right between Central Europe and the Adriatic Sea, Croatia was historically a prime target for expanding empires. Way back in 293 AD, the Roman Emperor Diocletian built his massive palace in Split. But the true demographic foundation really started in the 7th century with the arrival of the Slavic Croats. Over time, just to survive the encroaching Ottoman threat, Croatia had to form these strategic, centuries-long alliances. They first united with Hungary in 1102 and later came under Habsburg rule in 1526.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is looking at the sheer economic price tag of being a perennial borderland. According to a kind of detective study by economist Angus Maddison, where he tracked global GDP over centuries across 16 different nations, Croatia's economy absolutely struggled under all this continuous foreign rule. By 1700, they were in dead last place among those surveyed, trailing behind places like Slovenia and Moldova. Serving as the defensive shield for Europe was quite literally bankrupting them.
Moving on to Section 2, the turbulent 20th century, navigating unions and world wars.
If you thought those earlier centuries were chaotic, the 1900s were an absolute whirlwind. The Croatian people actually found themselves in 4 completely different political unions within just 30 years. First, the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed in 1918. That immediately birthed the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which was later renamed Yugoslavia. It was a pretty contentious, unbalanced union where Croatia often felt its national identity was being suppressed. Eventually, out of the ashes of World War II, Josip Broz Tito established Socialist Yugoslavia in 1945, which turned the nation into a federation of 6 republics.
During World War II itself, the territory was violently fractured. On one side stood the independent state of Croatia, or NDH, which was an Axis-aligned puppet state and a severe dictatorship led by the Ustasha movement. Pushing back was the partisan movement. These were socialist, anti-fascist forces that fiercely fought the occupation and eventually liberated Zagreb in 1945. It was a fragmented and tragic reality that left some incredibly deep historical trauma.
That brings us to a major turning point in modern history. Section 3, the War of Independence, the dramatic fight for sovereignty.
As socialist Yugoslavia began to disintegrate in the early 1990s, Croatia's quest for true self-determination took center stage. In the spring of 1991, they held an independence plebiscite, and the democratic mandate was overwhelming. With an astonishing 83% of the population participating, 93% of those voters chose to legally sever ties with the Yugoslav Federation.
At exactly 1815, on June 25, 1991, the Croatian parliament made this incredibly powerful declaration: "We are free, we are a sovereign state." It was the emotional climax of a centuries-long journey towards statehood. But, as we know, that freedom would not come with a terrible cost.
The immediate consequence of declaring independence was an intense and devastating conflict. Between 1991 and 1995, Croatia faced the heavily armed Yugoslav People's Army. And compounding the struggle, international arms embargoes from the West that severely hampered Croatia's ability to defend itself. Early on, they temporarily lost control of a staggering 1/3 of their territory, suffering intense casualties and economic destruction, before finally reclaiming those lands by 1995.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because while the war raged on the ground, a rapid diplomatic battle was taking place internationally. After the June 1991 declaration, a massive milestone hit in January 1992 when Germany officially recognized Croatia. This triggered a diplomatic domino effect, culminating in May 1992 when Croatia was officially admitted as the 177th member state of the United Nations.
Which takes us to Section 4, joining the European Union, integrating with the West.
Once the war ended, the young democracy faced a monumental task. They had to rebuild and really prove themselves on the European stage. Joining the EU wasn't just about hitting economic targets. It required strict regional cooperation. Basically, Croatia had to actively rebuild diplomatic and economic relations with the very neighbors they had just fought a brutal war against. They had to prove they could bring stability and act as a peacemaker in the volatile Balkan region.
And they definitely put in the work. From drafting a new constitution during their first democratic transition in 1990 to signing the Stabilization and Association Agreement in 2002, they steadily modernized their institutions. Finally, in July 2013, Croatia achieved its goal, officially becoming the 28th member state of the European Union. It was a massive testament to their democratic modernization.
Finally, Section 5, Tourism and Cultural Heritage, Forging a Modern Identity.
With peace secured and EU membership achieved, Croatia's global image and economy totally transformed. 7 billion euros. Just let that massive figure sink in and wake up your analytical brain for a second. That is the revenue Croatia generated from tourism in 2013 alone, fueled by nearly 60 million overnight stays. It's like overnight, they became an absolute economic powerhouse.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how vital that influx of capital has been. It literally became the engine of their modern economy. Today, tourism accounts for a massive 15 to 20% of Croatia's total national GDP, and it provides roughly 12% of the country's total employment. But what's drawing all these millions of people? Well, it's exactly the history we've been exploring. Tourists flock to see ancient Roman ruins like the Pula Arena and Diocletian's Palace. They walk the historic walls of Dubrovnik that once held off the Ottomans, they visit the stunning Šibenik Cathedral, and they indulge in a rapidly emerging gastronomy scene. Croatia has masterfully taken its turbulent, conqueror-shaped history and preserved it, turning it into its most powerful cultural asset. So we've covered 2 millennia of incredibly dense history in just a few minutes, from a contested borderland to an independent, thriving European democracy. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to consider. How will Croatia's resilient past shape its future role as a peacemaker and leader in the European Union? A nation born from the crucible of conflict is now uniquely positioned to guide the rest of the Balkans toward Europe. It's an ongoing story, and one for sure worth paying attention to. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.